Hey, it's Meow, and I'm here today with Karl, and I bumped into Karl on the last day of DEF CON, and we started talking, and we couldn't stop, so I thought I would put the video camera on. Now, Karl, you run a YouTube channel that's a bit unusual.
Yeah, it's called inRangeTV. You can find all the decentralized distribution points at inRange.tv. I have a little link on there called Watch. But what's unusual about it is, at least here in the United States, we provide firearms, history, civil rights, and frankly, the effect of firearms, both for good and for bad.
There's good uses of firearms?
There are. That's one of the things we don't talk about, especially on the left.
Yeah.
Or haven't historically on the left. We are starting to now. And that's what my channel's about. We talk about not just firearms, we just do reviews and such, but we take it from the perspective of like essentially an anarchist view on firearms, power, and the monopolies and liberties that come therefrom.
Because the left used to love guns.
At one point they did, yeah. Like we have, there's the silly trope, right? You go far enough left, you get your guns back. But we have been in a situation for a long time where left, which is sometimes, frequently synonymous, sometimes with liberal, is anti-gun.
Okay.
And but at least now in this country, we're starting to see a big change of people on the left side of the political spectrum, especially the further left, either feeling more of a understanding about the need for them to be armed, or worse, they actually feel at risk and don't see a choice not to be armed.
And in America, that's a real thing. Like, you do need to be armed because other people are carrying guns.
Well, yeah. So that's one of the things that's interesting about the problem here in this country, which is so different than from many other parts of the world, right? When it comes to firearms in the United States, like them or not is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's a technology that's part and parcel of the American experience.
Yeah.
It is part and parcel of American culture,
Yeah.
but it's also not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Any concept of, I think, any concept of any sort of legislative control that would suddenly magically make millions, actually more, potentially more firearms than humans suddenly disappear is not realistic.
Yeah.
And the people that believe in guns, or at least really adhere to them as almost like a religious ideology, aren't going to get them up because of law anyway.
Okay, yeah.
So on top of that, historically speaking, culturally, at least in terms of modernity, firearms culture is very much, has been historically considered kind of the monolithic ideology and image of the right.
So it's not just a firearm, it's what the firearm represents, what it symbolizes.
Yeah, so the American concept of this, like, and I don't agree with this idea, but the concept of the fierce individualist who, with their gun, they go off and they're like rugged and their liberty stems from the gun.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that kind of ideology, not only in our mythology, but even in our media. You see it. Look at any even modern movie that's American made. The gun is the thing, right? And it's a totem almost, like
and
an
there are
icon.
celebrities. There are celebrities that play into this too, align themselves with this for, who knows if they're being paid or not, things.
Sure.
But there is a certain amount of truth in this, right?
Well, I mean,
like the symbol of the revolution's an AK-47 for a good reason.
Oh yeah, and a machete or a cane knife when you think of the 1811 enslaved revolt down in Louisiana. So weapons are just like, here we are at DEF CON, where this is so salient. Technology is used for good and for bad. And so much of the conversation when it comes to firearms, and for understandable reasons, has focused on the bad because it has been used for many bad things. However, the reality is that if you look at history with a more open lens, you'll find that firearms have also been used very often for human liberation and saving of marginalized communities. And on my channel, and I'm not trying to promote the channel, we're just talking here, but like I try to focus on some of those topics. One that comes to mind very prominently were some enslaved men that had escaped southern Louisiana and were going on the Underground Railroad in an attempt to make it to Canada pre-Civil War. We're talking about the, So the Underground Railroad was a secret network of people that were helping hide refugee slaves to Canada. And once they got to Canada, there was no slavery there, and so they were technically free, in air quotes. Racism and all that still applied. But on the way, there was depots, and these depots were places that were safe havens for them. And I have a video about this. It's in Grinnell, Iowa. And while they were there, some of them decided just to stay there because it was an abolitionist community that was pro-black, pro-freedom. And so they're like, maybe we'll just stay here and not make it to Canada. However, economic interests prevailed, and pro-slavery and racist elements moved into the community, started taking the place over politically. And because these black men and one woman were being educated in the public school system, they started a race riot with the idea that they were going to kill these men. And so these abolitionists armed them, and said, today you're going to have to fight for your life.
Oh, wow.
And the fact that these refugee enslaved people
Yeah.
were armed with revolvers at that moment, when the mob came, it became a standoff, and no one died.
Yeah.
And because if they had not had those firearms, they would have been dead. And I don't know now how many ancestors live because of them, or who's that is that their great-great-grandfather?
Yeah.
But eventually they had to leave the community because it was too hot. But the fact that those abolitionists armed them was the only reason they continued to live. And those kind of conversations need to be had, in that the possession of firearms, whether you like it or not, it's irrelevant, is possession of power.
Oh, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Especially in Australia, we don't we don't really have guns. You know, we had a mass shooting and with a gun buyback scheme, and I think that everyone said they didn't want that to happen again. The symbol of the gun in Australia is not the same. It's definitely a symbol of power. Some people didn't give back their guns.
I'm sure they did.
And there's still stories about farmers and stuff where we realize, they have a semi-automatic weapon, right?
Right, yeah, of course.
By and large, most people gave back their guns. A lot of them were just hunting rifles, 22s and things. We didn't really have quite the same gun culture, but a lot of our folk heroes and things like Ned Kelly and things are,
Yeah, Ned Kelly everyone knows Ned Kelly.
So we've got guns ingrained in our culture in a little way. Our defining heroes are war heroes from World War One, but it's more, I think the symbols of camaraderie and brothership are more unifying than the symbol of the gun. So I think culturally us giving up guns wasn't such a big thing. But in America, the ideology around like veterans and things is ingrained. Like sometimes if a veteran hops on a plane, I have to stand up, and I'm like, I've never had this in my country.
Understood, right.
But you said that the experiences of veterans who've used guns, who want to keep guns when they come back, isn't the same for everyone.
No, that's for sure. I mean, well, not just veterans. I mean, another thing I'm working on right now is the black soldiers' experience in the American Army. We have a very contentious history in that regard, in that they were empowered at first when they were finally freed from slavery to be part of like the 9th and 10th Cavalry, or referred to as the Buffalo Soldiers, which becomes a contentious topic too, because they were actually used as agents of the state to oppress Indigenous and First Nations in the West.
Wow.
Boy, that brings up some interesting problems, right?
It does, yeah.
But at the same time, when you get to World War I, these men were standing up and volunteering to go to war as the American Expeditionary Forces going to Europe, fight against the Germans. But they were actually so, the bigotry and racism in the system was so intrinsic that Pershing didn't even want to have them under his command. He sent them to the French command. Because he's like, I don't want to command black troops.
Yes.
And so they put them under French command.
Wow.
And under the French command, they were actually provided general better treatment. They were seen as like regular soldiers. Because the French were, let's just say, a little further forward in terms of their, I'm not saying better, like perfect, but a lot better than America in terms of racism. And this is another topic on the video, actually, but this is another example of that.
So guys, just watch my channel and you'll be able to hear everything.
No, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, no, but these are like, so what happened was Pershing issued a letter to the French High Command that was said, please don't treat them with respect. They're going to expect it when they get home.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yes.
Now,
that letter was leaked by W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a black man, an activist here, and that in his newsletter called The Crisis.
Okay.
And so that what actually Pershing turned out to be sadly prophetic, even though what he was saying was terrible, because they were. And when they came back from the war in 1919, in racist terms, they were referred to as being uppity.
Oh, wow.
And we had race riots across the entire country in something called the Red Summer of 1919.
Oh, wow.
Terrible.
Finish fighting wars overseas.
Come back, and then you decide, you don't get to treat me like that anymore, and would stand up for themselves, frequently as in, reverberating in things that we see still in modern, like right now, veterans fighting cops. Because the cops cops represent the white institution, white power, and white supremacy, to be blunt. And so these veterans were like, we're not going to do this. And then by standing up and having some of them save their lives, a lot of them got lynched. But it's a thing called the Red Summer of 1919.
So they went and fought for their country,
and then came back and had to fight here against cops.
And were they
or crowds?
So the cops would have been armed.
Oh yes.
Were the opponents armed?
In many instances, they were as veterans, because they would steal weapons from the local armory from their station or whatever. So one of the examples of that I was talking about was they were on leave for some R&R, and the cops attacked them, and then they retreated, and then there's so many instances of this. I can't even tell you. There are so many instances of veterans versus cops in World War One, post World War One, and the Red Summer of 1919 that we could not enumerate them on this conversation.
That's terrible. Yeah.
It is terrible, but it talks back to the deep-seated issues that exist in our system of white supremacy and culture and power, and the cops being agents of the state, even going against men that fought for their country,
who are also agents of the state,
who were agents, right? But coming back and saying, no, you're not going to treat us the way we were treated previously. But at the same time, that's not the only marginalized community that needs defense. When there are monopolies of power, whether it's the state or a corporation or a religious identity or all of them combined, or when you see...
But you guys have separation of church and state, don't you?
In theory. The rise of theocracy in this country has been something that's also been going on.
Now, you said there's a lot of minority groups that are maybe disproportionately being oppressed compared to other groups. And some of these are your biggest supporters.
Well, yeah, and I'm thankful for that opportunity to be able to be part of a community. But in that regard, yes, that is happening. It was kind of happening organically. When I started doing my work and my message, it wasn't meant to target any particular group, or, I mean, in terms of a positive. It was just putting out a message of what I believed in, which is actual personal liberty and self-reliance and community reliance and community self-defense. And the people that in this country right now are being most afflicted and at risk are queer community, specifically trans folks.
What do you think it is about trans people that causes so much anger?
I think it's... I'm going to quote, it's going to sound so cliche, but I'm going to quote Bad Religion. Deep-seated, what's the word? It's a deep-seated, they have a quote in one of their songs, which is essentially this, I'm going to paraphrase. Dark things within the human psyche that we don't even understand. And so I don't know why, but what it boils down to is I feel like there's, within the human experience throughout history, there are always people, there's always a group of people that need someone else to other. Like it just seems like it's part of the human thing.
I reckon it goes back probably to the African plains before we were even human.
And when we go back to like not very long ago at all, it was, of course, it still is, but people of color, black people, African Americans, the freed and enslaved, they were oppressed.
Jewish people?
Of course. Of course. But like as it currently stands, I'm not saying that they're not currently suffering that as well. They are. But right now, at the moment, and I think it is the combination of the theocratical element with bigotry and probably deep-seated, weird, sexual repressive issues. Not to go there, but that's part of it.
I hadn't thought about that.
I think that there's some reality. Like I always say, on the left, I always see the thing. It's like, well, they're clearly just closeted, and that's why they hate them. And
it's deeper than that.
But that's such an easy out.
It is.
There's some of that, sure. Some of it is you've been taught to hate them because of religious ideology or whatever. But there's some truth to this too. I mean, it's like they don't like what they're feeling inside or something. I don't know.
I think in some ways, actually, now that we're talking about it, like it's actually more confronting to have a trans person than a gay person, because if you have like a reasonably straight, cis, white male, conservative from center of America who sees a very, very attractive trans woman with a penis and has very confusing emotions, it crosses pathways that they've never even examined or thought about.
It seems to instigate a level of anger that is pretty disproportionate to the reality of the fact that this doesn't affect them at all.
Whereas if they're closeted, it's something they can kind of deal with.
That's still to me masculine or feminine.
Exactly.
And I can just ignore that, right? So, but beyond that problem, we have to accept that bigotry exists.
That's right.
And that the bigotry is endemic to the system. Because we have people within our elected system that are openly advocating against for direct harm, if not worse, genocide or destruction of a culture and a people. And if they are the ones, if on the left we concede that, well, all the right-wing wackos own guns, and then we say we won't own guns. We have to depend on a system owned by the people that we know want our destruction to take away their own guns. It's not working. That won't work. And while this sounds very dark, and I don't mean it to, I don't see personally, as a person from a leftist anarchist perspective on this topic, I abhor power monopolies, right? So in this regard, the only answer I see is that we form a new culture of people who, through their own community defense, make sure that they're safe. And we form what that lands up into is kind of a mutually assured destruction scenario,
Okay,
which is when
yeah.
you bring your hatred,
Force.
we bring our love,
Yeah.
and hopefully none of us have to hurt each other.
I think there's very few people that really want to advocate for violence. They do exist, though.
There's always some, yes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people maybe secretly want violence, but they use their hate as a smoke screen for something deeper inside them. But you were saying before that like violence, that using a gun should always be the last.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like this is the last possible, every possible alternative that can be made should be taken, right? But not including your own destruction or the destruction of the people you love. That's where the line's drawn.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's going to be a fuzzy and difficult time to find that line.
Definitely.
Because if you decide too late, the analogies to the Holocaust are always so obvious and so commonly used.
Yeah.
But there's a point where the line's too late, and then now you're in the gulag or in the ghetto or worse, in the death camp.
That's right.
You don't know, that line's hard to define.
And it is. And when Dalai Lama escaped Tibet, eventually the monks picked up guns.
Almost every revolutionary action by man that was used in the cause of liberating humans, try to find one that didn't include like weapons or firearms.
That's right. And there are ones, but the exceptions prove the rule. And the thing is, the Buddhists used guns to save more life. And they made that decision, even though it went against everything that they believed, they still picked them up, and they were the most revered out of any because of how difficult that decision must have been.
So one of the messages that we see a lot within the firearms culture in the U.S. is this glamorization of violence.
Yeah.
It's really common. Well, you see it in our.
That's what we see.
Well, let's put it this way: you blankly see it in all American media, right? Sex, terrifying.
Yeah.
Murder, death, guns, yay, right?
And a lot of it's soft propaganda as well. So like, I find it difficult to watch I would say like some of the more mainstream American stuff that's just made like mass produced because it just, even if they don't know it, it's soft propaganda because the culture is bleeding through in guns just being normal.
Or violence being normal.
Right?
I would say guns should be as normal. Personally, I don't think guns are any more abnormal than any other technological tool. A computer on your desk or a pineapple from Hack 5 for breaching a wireless network is a weapon. Like, that is a weapon. How you leverage a pineapple is. Now, is it killing people? Actually, you could argue it might.
Yeah,
but these.
You definitely can. I agree with this as well. That there's this dual-use technology we have in Australia, which is like a police officer can essentially stop and search any of my equipment under this piece of legislation. I think it's been repealed now, I'm not sure. But it was basically that anything that could be used as a weapon was considered fair game and they had probable cause. And that meant any computer, any mobile phone, biology or biologist, anything I'm carrying could be seized with no explanation or anything. I tip it down the sink. Because what about if you use it as a weapon? It's like, okay, at this point you can seize the bricks in my house, the twig at the end of my driveway, the shoe on my foot, like.
So we see that as well with all sorts of laws here in terms of like criminal tools, or like if you had lockpicks in your car, those are burglary tools. No, I'm actually a locksmith, but like that sort of stuff.
Well, it's like if you have a baseball bat in your car, well, it's a weapon. You have a baseball bat and a baseball. It's a recreational tool.
It does sound like an American cliche thing to say, but like, a tool is a weapon when it's used for that purpose.
Definitely, yeah.
And like I understand this concept that like some things are like a car is not designed as a weapon. A car is not designed to kill people. It can, and it can be used for that. Let's be blunt. Firearms are used to kill people. They're designed to kill people. But at the same time, when we talk about like, let's diminish the amount of firearms in this country or in a country. My argument would be, especially in the United States, fine, start with the people that are actually using them the worst against marginalized communities. And you know who that is? Our cops. We can see it every day.
The thing is that the whole of the US, I'm just going to check this out. This, make sure it's still recording. Thank God.
But I mean, but like, if you're talking about weapons being misused against people that are that are vulnerable,
definitely,
it is not hyperbolic to say in the United States it's cops. It's cops. It's provable. And okay, so why are we not talking about the problem with firearms and American cops?
Well, you got the thin blue line, right? You got these flags and a culture.
But that's a religion.
What is what is it? Why do the right love cops so much?
I have a hard time understanding that as well, because you'll see this, there's a real counterintuitive juxtaposition of right-wing view, especially when it comes to firearms.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, like, come and take it out of my cold dead hands, and with a thin blue line flag on their car.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to the situation of come and take it, who do you think's doing that?
It's the black vets from
no,
1990.
it's well, it might be his cop, but it's the agents of the state.
That's right.
So if you have a fetish or fascination for the agents of the state, and defer to them power, aren't they the ones that are going to use that power against your interest? If it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
What I think that is personally is there's a certain element, a significant element. This is the kind of stuff that gets me in trouble, right? But like of American culture and patriotism that is actually a religion. Because it's not based on logic. It's based on articles of faith. And I'm not trying to denigrate religion. I'm saying this is a religion.
And I think
it makes, if you think of a lot of that Americanism as religion, it makes more sense because it doesn't have to be logical for them to say it.
I would agree with that. And I think as well that there's this element in religion that like the people who believe are like the chosen ones, right? So if you believe in the state and the goodness of yourself and the pure whiteness of your skin, then the cops are always going to act as an agent of you because they're the avatars of this thing that you believe, whereas you in your head think that like the other, which in this case is like minorities or black people, are always going to be enemies of the state, and you're not because you're white, right?
Well, the privilege there is real, right? So like
definitely.
as a person who is obviously very white, with all the privileges, very cishet and white, all the privilege that could come from my visible identity. When I get pulled over if I get pulled over by a cop or questioned by a cop, my first thought is not George Floyd or some other person we know was killed because of their color or because of their identity. I don't have that fear. These people we have a large contingent of marginalized communities in the United States for lots of reasons. Many of it systemic to go back hundreds of years. They have always grown up under the auspice that they know that they can be killed by these agents of the state
and do get killed.
And through things like qualified immunity will not be there'll be no vindication.
What's qualified immunity?
I'll get to that in a minute. No vindication or no justice for their lost life. Qualified immunity is a law that was passed ostensibly, this is wild, Congress during the civil rights era, which is still ongoing if you ask me, but what we call the civil rights era of the United States, the attempt to make things better, desegregate. You think of the time of Martin Luther King, and you think of all that time period, right? Malcolm X, all that going on. They made a law that was in an attempt, hopefully well-spirited, to criminalize racist aggregations such as the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan.
Wouldn't that be a sacrifice of freedom of speech, though?
Well, that's another question. Let me get there in a minute. So, but the law that they wrote was worded in a way that it was trying to illegalize like hate speech and hate movements. And they had a problem in that the law they created actually included the cops.
Oh, no.
So you had to do something now to augment this anti-racist law.
Wow.
And what you do is you provide qualified immunity, which means that cops really can't be prosecuted for their actions in the line of duty.
Including hate crimes.
That's not what it says, but in practice,
Whoa.
and what do you say? So for example, when officers were actually charged in instances, rarely, there's many instances where they were never charged, nothing happens. Some of them just get essentially retirement plan, and they just go.
They get paid.
They get paid to go not work for killing someone, right? When Floyd happened and the instigation, of course, of the riots and the Black Lives Matters movement, that was an instance in which, because of, frankly, in this instance, the brick, not the voting booth, because this is where it needed to be, the mass protests and in some instances, actual destructive violence, like direct action.
That's right.
They were charged. Okay. And however, that fine line between the agents of the state coming down with their machine guns was always present and possible. And a community that is therefore sitting there defenseless is defenseless. And I'm not sitting here saying kill cops. That's not what I'm exactly saying here. I'm saying that a community of people but are left in a situation defenseless against the agents of the state, the agents of a corporation, the agents of a religious movement, the agents of just the community around them that hates them because of who they are sitting in a situation where they have no recourse, and they ultimately are victims if someone decides that they should be.
But we know in 1919, the mere fact of being armed against an opposition may actually be enough to create a situation that's good for everyone, because it
good for everyone's a hard way to put it.
Okay,
it made a difference.
It made a difference, yeah.
And some people survived as a result.
Yeah.
There's a really good book that I would recommend to anyone that's interested in this topic called "This Non-Violent Stuff Will Get You Killed." And it's a narrative of mostly African American black people, of community defense and arming up to protect their communities against insurgent violent forces. Another one that comes to mind, this one is a prominent one. This local community leader, he actually a black man who was a member of the NRA. Okay, the NRA wasn't always what it is now.
Yeah.
The NRA at one point was more of a training organization, and it became a political thing later. And the NRA now is a toxic, terrible thing. But at one point, it actually wasn't that exactly. And so he was a member of the NRA, he was a marksman, he was training, and he ended up buying a significant amount of surplus M1 Garand semi-automatic rifles from World War II. We're talking the 50s here. I remember the exact year, I apologize. Armed up his community, trained them, and the Klan was coming in to do their thing.
Wow.
And they literally formed battle lines. And were in like trenches with surplus helmets, M1 Garands.
Wow.
This is in the book.
Wow.
And they didn't kill anyone, but by opening fire, the Klan did exactly what the Klan always does and turned tail and ran. The Klan always runs when met with force. Or almost always, hopefully. And luckily no one was killed, and I mean that. Human life being lost is a tragedy. Having to be lost for such stupid reasons with gunfire is another tragedy. If we can avoid that, like anyone that's not killed, there's a chance they could turn around and become a better human being.
So I think most Australians would agree that since we took guns out of our country, it's been generally a better country.
I could see that.
But also at the same time, I think we're still experiencing some of the issues that America's facing with respect to the rise of the far right. The disenfranchisement and oppression of minorities, especially Indigenous Australians. In the Northern Territory, I think 10% of the prison population is Indigenous, and there's 2% Indigenous people.
Systemic reasons for all that, right? Look at the prison populations of this country as well, same thing.
And there's been cases of police violence in Australia, ended in death, that didn't have to, and I don't know how many lefties would ever think about arming themselves in Australia, and I wonder if there's any circumstance under which they would actually decide that.
I would go back to historical precedent on that. Okay, lots of people have felt this way throughout history, and I'm not saying I think that Australia is not the United States and vice versa. These are very different environments and cultures and reasons. However, what I've seen from my work and what's going on in this country, there were a lot of people that felt exactly that way, especially people in the queer community, but not only. That started, it was impossible to not see the writing on the wall of the kind of people that were being elected, not just talking, being elected, okay? We're talking about people standing in places of power.
We have the same thing, we in the late 90s, early 2000s, we elected our first openly racist politician who now has a party called One Nation, right? And there are people that have been elected since then that were so racist, she had to distance herself from them.
I'm racist, but not that racist.
Actually.
Great.
This guy came in his maiden speech, he talked about the final solution.
Oh wow, wonderful.
Anyway, so
calling back to the freaking Reinhard Heydrich and all of them. That's great.
And these people are in our politics, so it exists here too.
I mean, obviously, it's the less violent a society and community can be, the better. And I'm glad to hear that things have been better for Australia in that regard. However, what I would argue to anyone that's feeling that idea is that I don't personally, as a person of my political ideology, ever trust. I hope and want the checks and balances of a system to work. I want non-violent solutions. I want people to collaborate, and build a better world. Even people's of adverse ideologies, working together for a better, freer, ultimately most of us want the normal things. To be left alone, to live our lives, to be ourselves, and to not be hated for it. If we could even settle on that alone, maybe we could have a better world. And that's what I want. Let's work for that. However, history would tell us we can't trust these systems.
Yeah, definitely.
To persistently protect the interests of the most at risk. In fact, history would tell us that over enough time, they eventually do the opposite.
Definitely, yeah.
They actually go after the marginalized and the people at risk. And if you have a good system now, that's great. Be thankful for that every day you have it. But when it changes and when it turns, where is the power monopoly going to lie? And it will lie with the state. And in this country, it would lie unless, as we see with left-leaning and other people now deciding to be interested in firearms, up until he's still a minority. Culturally, it's not only with the state and agents of the state, but also the general population of people that are being weaponized as bigots through systemic hatred and populism and fascism against you. And if you're sitting there at that point in a country like this, where guns are part of the culture, and the only people that own them are the people that hate you, it's probably a good time to consider maybe doing something differently. And thinking you're going to make the system take it away from itself isn't realistic. In Australia or other countries, and I hope this never happens, but if your system were to fall to that party, would you call it one nation? Let's say One Nation someday becomes the prominent party, which, again, I know Germany is such an easy example, but there were people in Bauhaus, Germany during the Weimar Republic that would have never. That was a moment of like human liberation and bohemian and artist expression, sexual experimentation and knowledge, and like the first real research into and transgender studies was there. All that was going on, and that is in Germany post World War I, before the rise of the Nazis. In 1925, it would have seemed great. 1935, everything's changed. 1939, it's not long. We're talking a decade.
That's right.
Within a decade, you go from this bohemian, free, liberal space to oppressed, if not hiding to save your life, or hiding others to save their lives.
And we were talking about this, that Trump doesn't come out of nowhere.
No.
And these parties don't come out of nowhere. They come out of culture and companies and groups of people working for time in communities to stir hate and all of these things. And this is the output.
He's the symptom, not the cause.
Exactly right.
And so, I know that we're talking American politics here, but like one of the things I'm sure you've heard of everywhere, Project 2025, which is this list of particular goals, which are, for all intents and purposes, theocratical bigotry. That's what I'm going to sum it up as. Okay, that is not new. They have been working on this concept for decades. It's been the slow roll, the slow game, slow incrementalism. You go back and look back at American extreme politics not that long ago, you saw it almost looks quaint by now. You think of the Tea Party, and they have their little hats on, and they're like, less taxes, and and they weren't even wrong about some of that. Whatever. Okay, I'm not trying to mock that. But that was at that moment, you look back at the Tea Party, and you're like, that was kind of cute.
They were considered ultra right.
They were. Yeah. But that wasn't long ago.
That's right.
In a short duration of time, we now have elected officials calling for the destruction of an entire group of people.
Which
right?
Is, so more than one group.
But that can happen in my opinion. As a person that's an amateur historian at best, that can happen in any country.
That's right.
And so, giving a power vacuum to the state or to the community or to any part of your community without thinking about if your best interest are in their mind, means that you're vulnerable. And when you look, again, I'm using that example of historical, like the Holocaust, but the Warsaw Ghetto. They were scrambling to find firearms. Okay, the realization was there was nothing left. They knew where they were headed. And so the resistance scrambled to find anything: a hand grenade, a pistol, a rifle, and I'm not saying that them having guns would have changed it, because it might not have. As a person, the end result might have still been a Holocaust. However, if I'm going to be in a place where there is an inevitable reality of that being the future, I'll be honest, I hope to take out as many of them as I can before I go.
If I was Jewish and the SS were on the way to my house, I would like a gun.
Right. At least
just 1 second. I'm just gonna make sure this is still going.
I know that sounds very. It sounds very extreme, but there's it's not the gun. This is where this thing. People on the right frequently, especially in America, maybe not even just on the right, the gun is used as this this item against evil. It is your sacred relic
Yeah.
that suddenly just owning this stops the problem.
It's like a crucifix. Or
Yeah. It's a totem. It's a sacred object. It's a relic. It's an item that protects you from evil. It does not. It is merely a tool. What protects you the best you can is forming communities and working together.
That's what we're talking about.
Right, but so to say that everyone, it's not as simple as just go get a gun.
Yeah.
It's not. That's in fact that's gross oversimplification. However, there comes a point where not having it means you have nothing left. And if it comes down to the point of this is all there is, and they're really and that's the reality of the situation you're existing in for whatever reason, whether it's because you're a person of color or you're queer or you're trans or you're just the wrong religion, or you're not the right, or you're an atheist, or pick a thing. And that's the thing they're coming for, because we see them come for all things that aren't aligned with their ideology. I wouldn't want to go peacefully, and I wouldn't argue any anarchist should.
Yeah, I would argue most people.
I don't think anyone should.
I think anyone who's oppressed, who's already oppressed, would feel that, especially minorities who are already disempowered. That having firearms is a way for them to actually claw some of that power back. Right?
A little bit.
And it doesn't mean that they're going to destroy society or anything. It just means maybe people will treat them with a bit more respect, oppress them a little less. That's something that could flow on from knowing someone might be armed. Right?
One of our like these little tiny little whimsical memes and stuff sometimes are overrepresented, but armed minorities are harder to oppress.
Exactly.
Simply put.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
And so when you going back to my reference material of the Warsaw Ghetto, scrounging for any weapon. If they had those weapons sooner, would it have prevented the Warsaw Ghetto? I don't know. We can't predict that.
That's right.
But we do know it would have made the cost higher. And when it comes to topics of human liberation and freedom, is there any cost that is too great for human liberation and freedom?
Of course not.
That's where I come from. And that does present a sadly, it should be, I would think in this country, the United States, that would be what should resonate.
Yeah.
But when I talk about, or not us, our community, when we stand as a saying something as simple as trans rights or human rights, they suddenly revert back from their idea that firearms are a basic human right through the Bill of Rights to not them though.
So there's right-wing people that are trying to take guns away from trans people.
Yes, and they want to do that via law.
But it says under the First Amendment,
the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Yes.
That every man has is because they're not a man.
Yeah. Well, man in the definition of the Constitution would be human being, right?
Okay.
But I mean, when the founding fathers were writing that, they were probably meaning white men that own property.
Yeah.
However,
they also said we the people.
Well, they do.
So,
but in the modern and in the proper interpretation of the Bill of Rights, it should mean all of people.
That's right, and it does mean that because the interpretation, and when it goes to court, that forms the law. So how the law is executed and tried and practiced ends up becoming the law.
This country did have a civil war to make that point,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the reality. And even after the liberation of the enslaved, it still took a very long time just to get voting rights, and we're still not there. Let's be honest. But
DC doesn't even have federal representation.
But like when it comes to that is still a work in progress.
Oh, you don't have only certain people can vote as well.
Well, no, I mean anyone that's a citizen can vote now.
Criminals?
If they get their rights restored after a felony. So if you're a felon, you can't vote.
Okay.
But you can petition to get your rights restored, and if you win in court, you can get your voting rights back.
So someone chooses, oh, you're good enough, I'm going to let you vote.
Essentially, but if you've ever committed a felonious act and you've been charged or you've been convicted with a felony, you've lost your voting rights.
Oh,
now,
okay.
and if you think so, but I mean, so the suffragettes had to fight for the right for women to vote. Black people didn't have the right to vote until like they're through the amendments, and that was after the Civil War was fought just to get them out of like actual like chattel slavery, and that's all it did. And it didn't even quite do that because then we still had the Civil War didn't end chattel slavery. It just turned it into sharecropping.
I saw some things while I was traveling around Virginia.
All of that. That's another topic. These are deeper topics than we get into. But even during the Civil War and before the Civil War, there were communities of refugee enslaved people, and I mentioned this earlier,
Yeah.
that by having arms, they defended their community and existed. I'm kind of rambling a little. I hope this is okay for your audience.
One of my favorite scenes in anything was who was it? You know who it was? It was Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
Interviewed Hunter S. Thompson.
Oh yeah.
And he was shooting at his neighbors.
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
And he was just talking about how democracy is a participatory act.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're talking about, I've seen that snippet. It's hilarious.
And it's good because I was like, and this kind of made me understand America a bit better.
Yeah.
Than like,
I don't know how Hunter Thompson exemplifies a normal American, but he's an interesting American.
Well, the thing is, I don't know if Trump exemplifies an ordinary American, but
right.
But
no, it's true. He does.
The thing is,
he actually doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes when you take it to the extremes, it can highlight things that can be hard to see from the outside.
Well, that's what gonzo journalism was with
right.
Hunter Thompson, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I think you did a good job of explaining that. Now, there's another couple of things I wanted to just cover. So, so since I've been in America, there was an assassination attempt made on Trump. I would just love to hear what you think about that as an American and what that's like. Because from the outside, it's a very different kind of thing. I don't think we've ever had an assassination attempt on our prime minister.
Yeah, in this country, we've had quite a few. Some successful, some not, right?
We had one guy die. I don't know. He's called Harold Holt. He went for a swim and he disappeared.
Oh, really?
So we named a swimming pool after him.
Well, I mean, that was a terrible event. Like, I think you can tell I am not a Trump fan. I am ideologically opposed to that man in every possible way. Yeah. He is a dangerous human being. Yeah. However, we are not, in my opinion, at the point that that's where we're at. Right now, we have a system that actually I said this when we were talking earlier. I'm like, not to be accused of being an optimist, but to a large degree, the American systems of checks and balances actually kind of worked. The possible end result of that man could have been far worse than it was, and I'm certainly hoping that we don't have to see that coming up. I don't want to see a Trump victory, right? However, when it comes to the assassination attempt, I actually, in this one, this is a hot take because I don't know anything much about the person that pulled the trigger. Yeah. However, this is a sad reality of another cultural disease we have worldwide, but exemplified in the United States. I don't think that particular person had a political ideology in that.
Yeah.
I think he was another sad, lonely person that did not have community, and he did something that was going to get him attention, and that was his moment. He was essentially a school spree shooter using a large, high-profile political person as his tool to get it.
Okay.
So not different than Columbine, because what they wanted to do is they wrote their diatribe, did their thing. Horrible event. Almost all of these spree shooters, mass killers, these things, they all have they recurring theme of sad, lonely people who do not have a community that's taking care of them, and they act out in a last attempt to get the attention that they want for some moment. And like, I personally think that the reason this is really interesting from the right too, from the right-wing perspective when you see it, that shooter turned out not to be a leftist. He turned out not to be trans. At least that we can tell, like from his profile and his media.
That the media went there.
They tried to paint that. I've even seen them trying to paint him. There was a transvestigation to prove that he was trans, like that stuff. But like, he turned out to be he seemed to be at best conservative, right leaning. I don't know, but he didn't seem to have like a particularly like vitriolic political ideology. He didn't seem to be. He appeared to be cishet. That's the current knowledge we have about this shooter, and because he wasn't those things, the coverage of it here, that attempted assassination of a presidential candidate and previous president, because he wasn't one of the marginalized community, off the radar.
Do you think if it was a trans person,
we would have never heard the end of it, and there'd be legislation right now taking gun rights away from the trans community?
Do you think that they would have been in their rights to try and assassinate Trump? Because we've talked before, political violence is a tool to stop oppression.
No, I don't. Actually, not at this moment.
I don't know how I feel about it, because I think that if I feared, like, him getting elected would have put my life in danger, I think I would have felt justified.
But there's still an election happening right now.
That's right.
And it's that election wasn't over, and it is not in the bag.
That's
and we
fair.
have new candidates that are presenting a new, fresh face.
Yeah.
And no, so I don't. Him being elected is not a given at all.
Yeah.
And so no, I don't think that.
Okay, yeah.
I do not.
Definitely. Now, you get a bit of hate on your channel.
A lot.
Yeah, and there's like forums that are set up with like criticism of you and things. Are you ever
Yeah.
worried that someone might target you with violence?
They've made the claims.
Okay.
They say it. Yeah, I think it's possible.
Yeah.
And it's certainly possible to meet lots of members of my community.
Yeah.
And but someone told me something, and this is going to I don't want this to sound self-aggrandizing. So I hope that people don't think
That's
that.
never fun.
But that's not what I want.
Yeah, yeah.
First of all, this is the right message.
Yeah.
This is what I believe. These are the things I believe, and I believe that everyone should be treated with respect and dignity, including people I don't agree with. They have the same rights.
Yeah.
They do not have the right to harm other people. They do not have the right to call for genocide.
Yeah.
They do not have the right to use violence or weapons as tools of intimidation against others who are just trying to live their lives. And I will never change my perspective on that. However, a friend of mine said this to me, and it's resonated with me throughout the project. Every time they're focusing on you, and I'm a cishet white dude with a lot of privilege, that's a moment they're not doing it to someone else.
That's really lovely.
So, well, I'm not trying to say, that's not a brag. I'm
No,
just
no,
saying,
no. It's a lovely sentiment that sometimes the things that you do can make people around you more safe.
So I am. It's hard. It's weird because I don't want to come off as like, again, self-aggrandizing, but I don't know how to not say these things because
No, you should.
I have, maybe by accident,
Yeah.
landed in a space where it's the only right thing to say,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to say the wrong thing
Yeah.
because that's not how I function. I believe in human liberation and freedom,
Yeah.
and I want people to be happy and feel loved and be safe. And the only answer I think of now is to stand up against that, and now is the time to use not violence but voices.
Yeah.
And as a group, stand up and speak out and do what you need to do within your own communities to keep yourself safe. And that, you always want to do the thing you can do that is the most capable with the least amount of damage, that's harm reduction to the world. So if that means going to vote for a candidate that's not my favorite but is better than the opportunity, like depending within reason, that's what you do.
Yeah.
If it's standing up and taking some heat on the internet for saying the right thing, that's what you do.
Yeah.
If it's the community is bullying your neighbor because they're trans, or just the weirdo kid,
Yeah.
that's what you do.
That's right.
And the more we hug and bring in people with care, the less people turn into spree shooters. The less people take a pot shot at a political candidate because they're hurting inside. And I think that's one of the things we're suffering with in this country is that rugged idea of rugged individualism has turned against us, and it's not made us feel like we're part of something together, but instead against each other.
Thank you very much, Karl. We might leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope to come to Australia.
I would love to come to Australia. I've never been.
Continue the dialogue, and thanks very much, guys.
All right, back outside.
Was that okay?
Everybody back up.